All right, good morning, folks. It's Mr. Walker here coming to you with our next round of notes. We're taking a big old step back in the proofs, but this time we're talking about congruent triangles as opposed to similar triangles. Now, remember, we got one, two, three, four, five shortcuts, and remember, we got to make sure that we write up our proofs so that they make sense. So pay attention to the information that we got in the given and make sure that it proves what we're trying to prove at the end. Let's get into our first ones. All right, so what we got right here, we got a quick little proof that says AC bisects BCD and that the line BC is congruent to DC. So we got this angle right here, BCD is going to be cut by this line here from A to C. So that means that this side and this side have equal angles right here. We also know that this line and this line are the same. So let's go through and prove us if these two triangles are similar. All right, first starting off, we put our given information. We always do that. Now, because we know that this line bisected this angle, we can talk about the two angles that are made to be congruent. Those are BCA and DCA. Because of those being bisected from before, we use the definition of angle bisector. Or you could say angle bisector. I'll take that also. Now, we also know that AC is equal to AC. That's a line that's a part of both triangles here. So we have to make sure that that is shown. So far we have a side here, an angle, and then a side. So the reason that we could say that these two triangles are congruent now is due to the SAS or side angle side postulate. All right, so obviously we were just able to go through, use the information that was here. Not all of this, when it comes to proof, really requires you to develop all the math necessary, but you have to be able to use our vocab skills and the terms that we know from these angles and from these lines to prove this. So let's do a quick little review here. So remember, we have five different shortcuts that say that these triangles are congruent. First one we got is the side postulate. We got side angle, angle side, and the hypotenuse leg theorem. So all five of these will lead you to tell if two triangles are congruent, just like how the names are written out for the postulates and theorems. These are exactly what you're looking for. So if you're looking for side, you're looking for all three sides to be equal on both sides of these triangles. Same thing with here. These sides need to be equal, and the angle that's connected to both of those has to be equal also. Okay? It's very self-explanatory. Just make sure that you keep that in mind. All right. So let's check out a couple of these. Now, I believe these two right here, these are on the right side of your paper under the review of congruent shortcuts. We got A, B, and they give us a couple triangles here. First triangle we got are ABC and STR by ASA. Now, the reason that you have to go through and say that these are going to be congruent, we're looking at their corresponding parts. I already know that because of these names, B and T has to be congruent to each other. Okay. So if this is going to be angle, I need a angle, a side, and then the angle on the other part of that line to prove that these two would be congruent. So if that's the case for this next triangle is trying to prove that these are congruent by side. So things I do know, I see that these both share two letters. They share C right here, and they also share. Oh no, sorry, they do not. I believe that this might be a typo. Let me go through and see if that needs to be fixed. No, A B C D C A. No, never mind. That's right. That's right. So, what can we prove to use that these are going to be congruent? I already know that the top and the bottom are the same. I know that that line in the middle that they both share is the same. I would need to have this side here where AB is and this side here where DC to be the same for this to really be side, side, side. So if I ever give you one of these congruence theorems, you have to be able to use what we know about the triangle in its image and be able to go through and find the part we need to say that they are congruent. So you just have to really look at it. So, a couple of tips that you need for writing congruence proofs. First off, ask yourself, what do you know? All right, we already know some given information, so expand on that. What does that given information give you based off of what we know from these vocab words? Next thing you need to ask, do we know all the information on this diagram? You've seen me in class go through and mark up a triangle based off of the information that they give us. So make sure that you mark that stuff up as you are going through the proof. Next, you want to look for any shared parts. Those parts are automatically going to be a set of congruent parts. So just like those sides that both triangles may happen to share, you can go through and say that those are equal. If you have any triangles that are overlapping, it may help for you to sketch them separately. If you see me help you out back in similar triangles, I went and redraw a lot of triangles for you guys. So if we need to redraw them. And then begin the proof by filling in all the given information. You can fill it out in one line or multiple lines. Just make sure that you got all the given information. You should be fine. All right, let's get in some more notes. So, if we are proving triangles are congruent, most congruence proofs will ask you to prove that two triangles are congruent. To do this, we have to look for our congruence shortcuts to write our proof. So, earlier we took a look at our proof from the beginning. We put up our given information and we marked some of the stuff that we have here. Okay. So I marked the sides that were equal. And I also know that based off of our given information, I can say that these lines are going to be making this angle and this angle congruent. It's helpful for you to go through and mark the stuff as you're going through the proof. Okay. And just like how I said that we got some shared sides, AC is equal to AC. You want to mark that also. That's a reflexive property. And once you get enough of the information, you can prove that your triangles are congruent. But you have to be able to go through and mark this and make sense of the information given to you. All right. So, next thing that we got to talk about. If we can prove that two triangles are congruent, we can prove that their parts are also congruent. Another part of common congruence proofs are that you are going to be able to write ones that involve corresponding parts that are congruent. In order to prove this, we have to first prove that the triangles are congruent. Now, this right here, this is something that we are going to mess with a little bit when it comes to proving that two triangles are congruent. CPCTC is an acronym for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, or we say this for short. So, if you have if you have congruent triangles, you can make conclusions about the other parts because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So if I have two triangles that are congruent, I can say that those parts that correspond ought to be congruent as well. So in this next proof, I do not give you that you are trying to prove that the triangles are congruent. We are trying to use the information about the triangles to say that these two angles, V and T, are congruent. So let's start off with what we know. We know that R is congruent to U. We know that RS is equal to, not equal, congruent to US. So RS is right here, US, that's right here. And angle R is over here, angle U is over here. So let's get into it. First off, I know that these are congruent because this is given to me and I mark them up on the triangles. So that's given. Now, we see a shape that we're familiar with right here in the middle where S is at. This crisscross that we see here produces a pair of angles that we are familiar with. So RSV and UST are a pair of angles right here at point S, and these are vertical angles. Now, what I see here is that I have an angle, a side, and an angle on this triangle that is congruent to an angle, a side, and an angle on the other triangle. So if that's the case, I can now say that these two triangles, RSV and UST, are congruent because of the angle side angle postulate. Now that I know that these two triangles are congruent, I can then say that angle V is congruent to T because of CPCTC. So if I have two triangles that are congruent, then I can say that any of their parts that we haven't necessarily talked about are congruent based off of the fact that we already know that these two are. Okay? So it just takes you a little bit of time for you to go through and set up at first, but you have to make sure that you got enough information to bring it home. Okay? Don't just write the word prove. Prove is not a reason. Okay? You have to give an actual bit of information so you can go through and actually prove that the triangles are in fact congruent. So let's get into our last little bit. You got a proof here on the bottom that you're going to have to go through and prove that is congruent. So I'll give you a little bit of time. Why don't you pause it, try it out, mark up what you got on the triangle, and we'll go over it in a second. Hey, folks. Hopefully, you actually went through and paused it and came back. So let's check our work. First off, L's the midpoint of KM. That's given to you. JK is congruent to NM. So that is because that's given to you. Now we also know that JL is congruent to NL. That's also given to you. Now, I know earlier that we said that L is the midpoint of KM. If L is the midpoint, that means that it's the middle. So that means that this side here, KL, has to be congruent to ML because they are both the two sides that make up KM. And that's because we use the midpoint. So we got our given information. We use from our given information to inform us that these two sides are congruent, and we used three sides being congruent here. So that means that this triangle has to be congruent to this because of the SSS postulate. All right, y'all. See y'all later. Make sure you get this in your book. Have a good day.